My name is Dr. Leora Hadas. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Nottingham, Department of Cultural Media and Visual Studies. I research film and television industries with an emphasis on sustainability and the green transition.
First question. How do you define New Hollywood and what characteristics are different from Old Hollywood?
You can talk about Hollywood today as being characterized, I think, most strongly by conglomeration, the way that film companies, have really become media companies, IP, intellectual property companies. If you think, for example, about Marvel, which to me is really the exemplary um, contemporary Hollywood company, not because I think their films are particularly great. Okay. But because of the way they do business is really emblematic of the way we do business today, which is that they're not really making movies, if you think about it. They've got particular iconic characters, they've got this universe, and within that universe, they're making all sorts of things. So it might be films, might be television shows, but so their business, which they say themselves, they're not in the film business, they're in the intellectual property business. And that's very typical of contemporary Hollywood. And if you think about all the big franchises that we're talking about, they all operate along that same logic. Harry Potter, Star Wars. So that is a really big part of contemporary new Hollywood, if you want to call it that. And I think another important characteristic is this reliance on these big franchise tentpole films on the one hand. On the other hand, the presence of a lot of quite small budget indie films with not much in between. The mid-budget, middle range film has been dying a death for a time. It'll come back because Hollywood works in cycles. But that's the landscape today. That when I think of Hollywood, that's what I think about. I think about big, big franchises, and I think about squishy little movies, independent films. Um, and the business structures that make it so, the really big companies, as opposed to those a lot of small niche studios that target a really varied international audience.
How have streaming platforms changed the view of Hollywood?
Streaming platforms, I think, have had a number of impacts. Probably the one that we most has been most disruptive is the changing of release windows. Companies used to control more, to be able to have more control over, when a movie comes out, in which theaters it shows, how many weeks it plays, what does it play with. Um, so that was part of the business of distributing movies and making sure that they would be profitable. And of course, with streaming companies, there being a new place to release, and when your movie goes out and it's part of a huge archive, and you need to deal with this new company, that Netflix, for example, or Amazon, that has been a real stake in the industry's wheels for a while, just trying to figure out how to work with these new companies. Now you see a lot of streaming platforms bringing in new forms of content from around the world, challenging again established conventions of filmmaking, television creation, storytelling, etc. We're now seeing a lot of the big Hollywood studios and even the medium Hollywood studios kind of racing to grab a slice of that streaming pie. So you get Disney Plus and you get Paramount Plus. So they're all trying to create their own streaming services just so they can have a degree of control over this new sector of, segment of their distribution. With the result that what, we as the customers, the audiences are getting the streaming wars. And now you have to have like stream five, six, eight streaming services. And I don't think that's viable. I think that's going to collapse at some point.
With that, do you see like opportunities and challenges?
Subscription model, you have to pay for all of that stuff, and people are just they can't do that. You especially in a cost of living crisis, global recession difficulties. People are really struggling to pay for all the streaming services that they want. And if for a while, and that was interesting, for a while, streaming, it looked like streaming Netflix back when it was mostly Netflix was going to, be a significant reduction in piracy, at least in places where it was available, because, it's a lot more convenient to get a Netflix subscription for 6 quid a month and just have the content. But now that you're going to pay 6 quid so that was great. But now that you have 6 quid for Netflix and 6 quid for Disney, the people are turning back to piracy because come on. So that I think is the biggest one of the biggest challenges that Hollywood, that all the companies that are trying to get into a slice of the streaming pie are struggling. It's all happening very, very quickly.
Do you think the social media like TikTok have influenced the change of Hollywood?
Once you had video based, I mean, TikTok now is doing some really interesting things. Um, as a distribution channel, as in a really, really fascinating phenomenon in which studios are releasing episodes of television shows on TikTok, 10 minutes at the time, and you watch all of Veronica Mars or Grey's Anatomy, which to me is completely mad, but I'm old, I guess.
What role do you see diversity and in conclusion in shaping the future of Hollywood?
Wow. See, that's really hard because on the one hand, there's been a huge and beautiful push to talk about issues of diversity, equality, inclusion around gender, around race, sexuality, in Hollywood. And that's been great to see. So the conversation is moving along nicely. Actual change, that's been a lot slower to happen. Um, People talk about cancel culture, but very few creators, major creators, actually, or people in power are actually getting cancelled out of the industry. That's mostly doesn't really happen at these levels. And there's still a lot of pushback on movements like Me Too. So I think the question is, will the conversation translate to action? And there are ways in which it already is, like, for example, the inclusion of some intimacy coordinators on sets. That's happening more often. It's wonderful. But when you look at the numbers of, how many women, especially women of color, are active in Hollywood, we're still struggling to push these up, and we should do better. Um, we really should do better. So it's all a question of how do you translate the conversation to action.
What impact has COVID had on Hollywood, and how do you think the industry is adapting to change?
Um, COVID has had a major impact in the sense that it has shown the industry that quick, necessary change is a possibility. Um, and So, when you think, for example, about release windows and the question of when to put a movie out or a show and how to manage, releasing it on streaming versus in theaters, COVID has taught the industry some valuable lessons about that, rather against its will. So that's been a major I don't know if a good change. I mean, I think for me, the most important change is in the way that it has revealed tension, the struggles around the people working in the industry. It's really pushed, work habits, changed work habits. It really pushed to the limit a lot of people who are already quite struggling. It's an industry with a really high rate of precarity, always long hours, project-based work. So a lot of people are unemployed at any given time, between projects. Very stressful, very intense work, very exploitative work. And COVID has come and just kind of sat on top of that, and triggered some conversations about that. Like, is that viable? Is that how people should live? Is this how the industry should look? And for me, especially, I work in sustainability. I work in this question of the material impacts of film production, which I think a lot of people are aware of, just how polluting that can be. And COVID came along and showed, okay, all those necessary changes we need to make, whether in terms of everybody wearing masks or in terms of no using plastic cutlery and diesel generators anymore. And so we can do it, we can flip on a dime and do it. So a lot of conversations that have been stalled with, oh, we can't possibly change the way we do things. Now you can't say that anymore because they did change the way they do things.